I noticed the job listing 2 weeks ago, a night guard position at West Market in Redacted, Pennsylvania. The shift ran from midnight to 6 in the morning, offering $21 per hour. Right from the start, something about it felt off. What kind of grocery store needed overnight security while it was closed? Was crime in the area that bad? But I was in desperate need of money, so after a brief phone interview with a man named Clive, I found myself pulling into the parking lot for my first shift just 2 days later. As soon as I arrived, I got an idea of why they might need a night guard. The store sat at the edge of a nearly abandoned strip mall. Large signs reading "Space for Rent" were plastered across the windows of neighboring businesses, though judging by the dusty glass and the way the flickering streetlights cast eerie, jittering shadows, it had been a long time since anyone had shown interest. I parked near the entrance, and as I got out of my car, I noticed a woman hurriedly walking away from the building. "You must be Aaron," she said, slightly out of breath. "The night guard?" "Yeah, that's me," I replied. "Clive left you some instructions. I put them on the conveyor belt at Register 1. She gave a quick nod before stepping past me, heading toward the only other car in the parking lot. "Oh, thanks," I called after her, trying to sound friendly. My inner voice nudged me. "Be polite, she's your coworker after all." I turned back. "Hey, what's your name?" But she was already slipping into the driver's seat. The door slammed shut, the engine revved, and the car shot backward before peeling out of the lot. Well, so much for making friends. I turned back to the store, suddenly aware of how empty the parking lot had become. The nearest streetlight sputtered, casting light in erratic bursts as if trying to stay awake. A cold wind picked up, sweeping a crumpled paper bag across the cracked pavement. Here goes nothing. The automatic doors groaned as they slid open for me, and I stepped inside. Surprisingly, despite the store's rundown exterior, the interior was clean and well lit. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and soft jazz music hummed from unseen speakers. It felt almost normal. I made my way to Register 1, where a folded piece of paper waited on the conveyor belt. Picking it up, I unfolded it and began to read. "Dear Aaron, welcome to the West Market family. We sincerely hope you enjoy your first shift. To assist you, we've put together a list of rules that will help make your night as smooth as our fresh-baked apple pie. 1. As the night guard, you are required to patrol the store every 30 minutes to ensure everything is as it should be. In between patrols, you may stay in the break room at the back of the store and monitor the security cameras. 2. Do not walk down aisle 7. Do not look down aisle 7. 3. If you hear knocking coming from inside the freezers in the frozen food aisle, ignore it. 4. If you find a shopping cart abandoned anywhere in the store, return it to the front immediately. 5. If you come across a pool of blood in the meat aisle, do not be alarmed. Sometimes the packaging leaks. Simply retrieve a mop and bucket from the storage closet and clean it up. However, under no circumstances should you step in it or touch it directly. 6. If you see a woman inside the store, immediately go to the break room and remain there until she leaves. Do not call the police. Do not acknowledge her presence. Do not make eye contact. 7. The music playing throughout the store is a pre-recorded instrumental jazz track. If it ever stops, go to the break room at once and stay there until the music resumes. Number 8. Under no circumstances should you end your shift early. Thank you for your time, and we hope you enjoy your shift. I stared at the list, reading it again, slower this time. These rules were bizarre. A woman in the store? No aisle 7? I'd worked as a bouncer at a nightclub in a rough part of town before, and even that job hadn't come with instructions this strange. Maybe it was some sort of test. Maybe Clive wanted to see if I could follow rules, no matter how ridiculous they sounded. I glanced up at one of the security cameras mounted in the corner, half expecting someone to be watching me through it. All right, challenge accepted. I pulled out my phone, 12:06 a.m. Might as well get my first patrol done before settling in. Walking through an empty grocery store was unsettling. The usual hustle and bustle were gone, leaving only the hum of coolers and the occasional soft creak of a shelf. The bakery section was completely covered, the breads and muffins stashed away for the night. White plastic curtains had been pulled over the vegetable displays, their opaque material making the produce bins look like ghostly shapes in the dim light. When I reached the meat section, I noticed the coolers had been covered too, thick plastic sheets draped over them. Through the small gaps, I caught glimpses of bright red, massive ribeyes, sirloin steaks, thick slabs of meat with the bones still attached. I quickly looked away. I wasn't a vegetarian or anything, but I'd never been fond of looking at raw meat. Turning my attention to the aisles, I passed by aisle 3, pasta and sauces neatly lined up on the shelves, their glass jars glinting under the fluorescent glow. Aisle 4, cookies and snacks. Aisle 5, aisle 6. Then I reached it. Aisle 7. I kept my eyes on the floor, resisting the urge to glance up. It felt ridiculous, but if they were watching the security footage, I didn't want to mess up my first night. Moving on, I continued my patrol, making note of a nondescript brown door near the back of the store, the break room. Good. Once I finished this lap, I'd settle in, open my laptop, and finally finish watching Friday the 13th, the final chapter. As I made my way toward the front again, I passed through the frozen food aisle. That's when I noticed it. A shopping cart. It was sitting in the middle of the aisle, positioned at an odd angle, like someone had abandoned it in a hurry. Of all the rules on that list, this one irritated me the most. I was hired as a security guard, not a cleanup crew. Wasn't it the employee's job to put the carts away at closing time? With a sigh, I started pushing it toward the front of the store. The wheels rolled smoothly beneath me, and the soft hum of jazz music played in my ears. As I turned the corner, passing the cash registers, I headed toward the entrance, when I heard it. A faint sound, barely noticeable over the music. I stopped, straining to listen. Silence stretched on for several seconds, and then it came again, a quiet, muffled sob. A chill ran down my spine. The doors had been locked the entire time. No one should be in here, unless a customer had somehow stayed past closing. Maybe the employee I'd run into outside hadn't noticed them and locked up before they could leave. "Hello?" I called out. A broken sob answered. My heart clenched. It sounded like a woman, or maybe a child. "I'm coming!" I shouted, breaking into a run. "Where are you?" No reply, just more sobs, growing heavier. I rushed toward the sound, promising that everything would be fine, until I stopped cold. The crying was coming from aisle 7. Do not go down aisle 7. Do not look down aisle 7. The rules had been crystal clear. I halted just outside the aisle, pressing myself against an end cap display of mayonnaise, angling my body so I wouldn't accidentally look in. "I'm gonna help you," I called out. "Can you tell me what happened?" The sobs hitched, and then, finally, the voice spoke. "Help me." It came through choked cries, trembling and pitiful. I wanted to step forward. My foot was already hovering above the floor, my instinct pushing me to rush in and help. But something stopped me. A nagging feeling. A small, alarm-like pulse of fear ringing in the back of my mind. Because out of all the aisles in this store, why this one? Besides, they were safe. It wasn't as if they were stranded in the middle of the night on some empty road. They were here, inside, with me. "Come out of the aisle," I called, my voice unsteady. "Then I can help you." "Please," the voice begged. "Help me." This was ridiculous. Clearly, someone had been locked inside and was panicked. All I had to do was go in there, see what was wrong, and help them get home. But then, the way they said it, the exact same phrasing, the same stammer at the start, the same slight emphasis on me, like a recording, like something mimicking. A cold sweat prickled at my skin. "Come out of the aisle," I said, louder this time. "Come out, and I'll help you." The sobbing escalated, frantic and hysterical. "Help me!" The voice cracked with desperation, twisting something inside my gut. I pressed myself harder against the mayonnaise display. Stomach flipping. I could call the police. They'd know what to do. Except my phone was at register 1, sitting in my backpack. And to get there, I'd have to pass aisle 7. The rules didn't say anything about walking past it, just not going in or looking down it. I couldn't stand here forever. What if it really was someone who needed help? A lost kid with a twisted ankle, unable to get up? "Don't worry," I called. "I'm getting my phone and calling for help." I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and stepped across the threshold. The crying stopped instantly. One moment, it was ear-piercing sobs, then absolute silence, as if someone had hit a mute button. And then, footsteps, loud, slapping against the tile, running. Something big was sprinting down the aisle toward me. A surge of panic crashed through me. "It's a trap. They're coming for me. I'm going to die here." I sprinted across as fast as I could, heart hammering. The footsteps pounded, getting closer, until I reached the other side. Silence. The only sound was the soft jazz playing overhead again. I bolted for the break room, the cart forgotten. Inside, I locked the door and slumped against it, breath ragged. The tiny square window had been covered with black construction paper, blocking any outside view. The only light came from the glow of the computer screen on the desk. Shakily, I flipped through the security feeds. A sinking feeling hit me. None of the cameras covered aisle 7. Every angle deliberately avoided it. I scanned the grainy footage, searching for anything, until my eyelids grew heavy. Just for a second, just to rest. When I opened them again, the clock read 12:30. Time for my next patrol. I didn't want to go. I felt safe here, locked in. But ignoring the rules would be worse. Swallowing hard, I forced myself up and stepped out. The store was dead silent. No crying, no footsteps. I started in the back, walking down aisle 17. Rows of canned goods lined the shelves, reflecting the dim light. But as I passed them, something felt off. The labels. No familiar brands, no Chef Boyardee, no Green Giant, just the same. Uniform cans, meat stew. Row after row, shelf after shelf, all the same. I reached the end of the aisle and turned toward the front. And that's when I noticed the cart. I hadn't returned it, but it wasn't where I'd left it either. Instead of sitting abandoned near aisle 7, it was now neatly placed by one of the cash registers. Like someone had moved it. Like someone had been checking out. A lump rose in my throat. Slowly, I reached for it, hands hovering over the handle before finally grabbing hold. I wheeled it toward the doors. Outside, the parking lot was pitch black. No streetlights, no flickering neon signs, nothing. The cart return was only a few feet from the entrance, just in and out. I shoved the cart into the row and turned, rushing back inside. Locking the door behind me, I exhaled sharply, heart still racing. That wasn't so bad. The relief lasted all of 2 seconds. Because then, I noticed the silence. No music. The jazz wasn't playing. I'd been so focused on the cart that I hadn't realized when it stopped. How long had it been off? A knot of dread curled in my stomach. I spun on my heel and bolted toward the back, past the aisles of snacks and cookies. I swerved, burst into the break room, and yanked the rules from the wall, scanning them frantically. I shouldn't, under any circumstances, end my shift early. Why did he write that? Was it just because he didn't want anyone flaking out on him? Or was there something worse waiting for me if I left before my shift was over? I really wanted to go. I pulled a soda from my backpack, popped it open, took a sip, and scrolled through the security feed. 5 more hours. The next 4 patrols were uneventful. The rules didn't specify how long they had to be, so every 30 minutes, I sprinted a lap around the store as fast as I could. The whole thing took about a minute, and for the remaining 29, I locked myself in the break room. On my second patrol, as I ran past the freezer aisle, I heard knocking. At first, it was soft tapping against the glass doors, but it quickly escalated into loud, forceful bangs, like someone was slamming their palms against the doors. I followed the rules. I didn't stop. I didn't look. I just kept running until I was back in the break room. By the last patrol, the music had cut out again. I didn't hesitate. I made a beeline for the break room as fast as I could, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. And now, here I was. 3 hours left. I stared at the clock on my phone, watching the minutes crawl toward 3 a.m. I got to my feet, shaking out my nervous energy, trying to get myself ready to sprint again. I used to be a runner back in high school, but that was a decade ago, and I was completely out of shape. The last patrol had left me gasping for air, my legs burning from exertion. My hand tightened around the doorknob. My pulse pounded in my ears. 3, 2, 1, go! I yanked the door open and shot out into the store, only to freeze. There was a massive pool of blood on the floor. Every bit of air left my lungs in an instant. It glistened under the fluorescent lights, deep red, fresh. The rules said I had to clean it up, but that would take time, at least 10 minutes. I wasn't safe out here for that long. I swallowed hard, forcing my legs to move, and rushed to the supply closet. Grabbing a mop and a bucket, I started working as fast as I could. The job was messy. The mop dragged through the thick blood, streaking it across the tiles before I dunked it into the soapy water, over and over. The water in the bucket turned pink, then red. A few droplets splashed dangerously close to my shoes, but somehow I managed to avoid getting any on me. By the time I was finished, it was 3:27. Time for another patrol. I was too exhausted to run, so I settled for a brisk walk. Heading through the frozen food section, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: handprints on the glass doors. Smudged, misshapen handprints of all different sizes. But something was wrong with them. The fingers were too long, too thin. I turned my eyes away and kept going. 2.5 more hours. The store was silent, except for the sound of my footsteps on the tile and the endless loop of jazz music, which was starting to drive me insane. The same saxophone melody, over and over. I had probably heard it 20 times by now, and it made me want to break something. I sighed, continuing toward the produce section, my eyes scanning the aisles automatically. Then I stopped. Something caught my attention. A figure stood in aisle 9. A woman. She was facing away from me, completely still. She wore a flowing blue linen dress and black high heels. Long black hair cascaded down her back, reaching almost to her waist. In one pale hand, she held a small basket. It was filled with raw cuts of meat. The rule echoed in my mind. If you see a woman in the store, immediately go to the break room. Do not make eye contact with her. I took a careful step backward, then another. As quietly as possible, I turned down the next aisle, heading straight for the break room. Click. Footsteps. The sound of heels against tile. I quickened my pace, heart racing. But then, the footsteps weren't coming from behind me. They were coming from in front of me. I dropped my gaze to the floor, just in time to see a pair of sleek black heels step into the aisle. Don't look. Don't make eye contact. The words pounded in my head, but she was standing in my way. All I could see were those polished high heels and the droplets of blood seeping from the meat in her basket, staining the floor in uneven splatters. I took a step back. It was my only option. Keeping my eyes locked on the ground, I moved cautiously. Click, click, she followed. Every step I took, she matched, her heels tapping against the tile in perfect time. A thin white calf came into view, moving in sync with my own steps. I sped up. So did she. Click, click, click. Panic surged in my chest. I spun around and ran. Click, click, click. She was right behind me. I swerved into a random aisle, sprinting toward the break room, and skidded to a stop. A shopping cart was blocking my path. No, several shopping carts. They were stacked together in a precarious tower, piled almost as high as the shelves. I was trapped. My pulse roared in my ears. My breath came in short gasps. Click. A single, slow footstep. Then another. She was coming. I had no choice. I turned and bolted out of the aisle, trying to put as much distance between us as possible, and stepped straight into another nightmare. I had entered aisle 7. The thing on the floor wasn't human. A hunched, contorted shape sat in the center of the aisle, its sickly blue-tinged skin stretched tight over an unnatural frame. A tattered gray garment clung to its twisted limbs. It was curled in on itself, its posture eerily childlike, like it was crying. But it had no head. My stomach lurched. My mind screamed at me to move. The moment I took a step back, the thing began to unfold itself, and then it started coming toward me. I spun around, screaming as I bolted down the next aisle. Somehow, against all odds, I made it to the end without stumbling. My feet skidded as I veered left, heart pounding, my destination clear, the break room. Almost there. Just a few more steps. My fingers fumbled against the doorknob, and with one desperate wrench, I flung the door open, diving inside before slamming it shut. My legs gave out beneath me, and I collapsed onto the nearest chair, gasping for air. My eyes locked onto the door, the lock in place. But was I really safe? The rules never guaranteed safety. Maybe hiding in here only bought me time, prolonged the inevitable. I forced my attention toward the security monitor, my shaking hands gripping the edge of the desk. The grainy footage flickered on the screen, showing the middle of the store. Empty aisles stretched out in eerie stillness. No sign of her. Swallowing hard, I switched to the next camera. The produce section, deserted. My fingers trembled as I clicked again. My breath hitched. She was there, standing motionless, right in front of the break room door. She was so still that for a split second, I thought the screen had frozen, that I was staring at a photograph. But then, the slow, rhythmic drip of blood from the raw meat in her basket shattered that illusion. My stomach twisted. I tore my eyes from the monitor, my pulse hammering as I glanced at the bottom of the door. My breath hitched at the sight of a shadow stretching across the floor, unmoving. My fingers clenched into fists. Go away. Please, just go away. As if she heard my silent plea, the shadow shifted. The faint silhouette of her head in the door's small window tilted, as though she was considering something, calculating. My throat tightened. Now I understood why the window had been covered before. Forcing myself to look back at the screen, I searched for any sign of change. She was still standing there, but something was off. The way she held herself, the position of her body, it wasn't right. Squinting, I leaned in, trying to make sense of it. And then my stomach dropped. Her feet, her heels were facing forward, but I was still looking at the back of her head. Long, black hair cascaded down to her waist, perfectly still. Either her hair had fallen over her face, or she had turned her head all the way around. Bile rose in my throat. The minutes stretched into eternity before she finally moved, her body pulling away from the door. I exhaled a shaky breath, but something about the way she walked sent a new wave of nausea rolling through me. Her movements were wrong, stiff, uneven, as if each step was being yanked from her body rather than taken willingly. The lagging frame rate of the security footage made it even worse, her figure lurching forward in unnatural, jerking motions. It was agonizing to watch, and then she was gone. I let out a sharp breath, my limbs weak and trembling. Okay, think. The rules. They said to wait until she laughed. That was the only way to know she was really gone. My fingers, still unsteady, hovered over the keyboard. All I had to do was switch to the front door's camera and wait. The second I saw her leave the store, I would be safe. Minutes passed as I sat frozen, listening to the thundering beat of my heart. Forcing myself to act, I pressed the arrow key, shifting through the security feeds one by one. And then, I recoiled, my body jolting so violently that my chair scraped against the floor. Her face filled the entire screen. I couldn't breathe. Her eyes pure white. No pupils, no irises, just empty, soulless voids threaded with spidery veins that seemed to pulse against the static-ridden screen. A scream tore from my throat as I stumbled back, hands flying up to cover my face. My mind raced. The rules said not to make eye contact. But did this count? Through the screen? Did it still count? A strangled, trembling whimper escaped me as I risked a peek through my fingers. She was moving, scaling the wall, crawling downward like an insect. My stomach turned as her hands and feet skittered unnaturally across the ceiling before she suddenly twisted, shoving her way through the glass doors. And then, she was gone. She had laughed. I was safe. Or at least, as safe as I could be in this cursed grocery store. My eyes darted to the clock. 3:58 a.m. Almost time. Dread curled around me like suffocating smoke, but I had no choice. Gritting my teeth, I forced my aching legs to move, throwing the door open and bolting through the store. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I rushed past carts stacked high like unstable towers, past the pounding hands pressing against freezer doors. My stomach twisted at the dark splotches of blood staining the glossy tiles, remnants of the woman who had stalked me. By the time I completed my patrol, my body was shaking violently. I barely made it back into the break room before the weight of everything crushed me. And for the first time in years, I broke down sobbing. The next patrols passed in a haze of dread. The store pulsed with unnatural sounds, the quiet, pitiful sobs drifting from aisle 7, the relentless banging from the freezers, but nothing came for me. And then, finally, 6 a.m., the moment my eyes caught the first hints of dawn bleeding through the glass doors, my entire body sagged with relief. I had survived. I was free. Out in the parking lot, the world was stirring back to life. A handful of cars rolled in, employees stepping out, rubbing sleep from their eyes, clutching coffee cups like lifelines. The second the first one stepped inside, I didn't hesitate. I bolted. Out the door. Into my car. Gone. I had never known relief like this. Never felt so light, so untethered. The nightmare was behind me. Even my financial problems, the very reason I had taken this godforsaken job, felt insignificant compared to what I had endured. As I pulled onto the main road, I rolled my windows down, letting the crisp morning air rush in. My fingers flipped the radio on, ready for something familiar, something grounding. But what played through the speakers made my stomach sink. Not classic rock, not a song I knew. The bright, cheery melody of a saxophone looped endlessly through the speakers, weaving its way into my bones. And as the horrible tune played on, realization clawed its way into my chest. Maybe my time as a night guard for West Market wasn't over after all.